Right, off we go. So we're here today in this online session. It's part of the ATA Insights Relearn program, where we teach you, well, different things teach you. Actually, we don't teach, but we have these online sessions about all these different items that are interesting, that are trendy, whether they're technological, whether they're markets. And today we're learning about the battery storage market. Much has been said, much has been written about it and how quickly it's going to escalate, how the prices of batteries are doing. But we're going to hear here how the market is faring for this 2019. And with us today, we have a global expert and leader in the global battery storage industry. Michael, please can you unmute yourself, tell us a little bit about you so that people know who you are if they already don't.
Sure. Hello, Belen. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here today. Thank you, Belen and Araceli, for setting this up. Yes, my name is Michael Salomon. I run a company called Clean Horizon, which I was fortunate enough to start 10 years ago. We are a consultancy 100% dedicated to energy storage. We have no other business. And in storage, we simply do two things. The first one is market analysis. Good thing, because we're going to discuss the market today. And second thing, we are a technical consultant specializing in both helping IPPs design and procure their storage plans and at designing energy storage roadmaps for governments and utilities.
Excellent. So, Michael, we've heard a lot about the global battery market. Much has been said about the prices. So you're going to set the record straight today, right?
I'm going to set some record, and if you guys think it's straight, that works for me.
Excellent. All right, if you could share, please, your screen and get into your presentation and get the questions rolling. This is a 30-minute session, so as soon as Michael is done, then we'll just get into the questions that we have. I'll have some too. And, the idea of this is that in very little time, you get a very good grasp of what's going on. Go ahead, Michael.
All right, so thank you. Thanks again for being here. So I'm Michael Salomon, and I'll be discussing some what we call our 2019 forecast. So we're already in the middle of the year, and so let's call it a forecast until the end of the year to see what's going to happen in the energy storage space for the months to come. By the way, this is me, and this is Belen. You can recognize us. So basically, when we looked at the market earlier this year, we thought, and we'll still think, that there's a handful of countries that are going to set the stage for storage during the year, and those countries are listed out over there. It's probably, the order doesn't really matter, but I think the top 4 countries are probably South Africa, France, South Korea, and US, with probably France being the 4th, and South Africa being South Korea being the 3rd, and South Africa and US being either 1st or 2nd, depending how you see it. And there's also a handful of other regions and countries where we believe energy storage is going to start happening in the coming 6 to 12 months, and I want to discuss those. There's a lot of things I'm going to say because, as you notice, I speak really fast, but there's also a lot of things I'm not going to say because we only have 30 minutes. So please ask questions. First thing on South Africa. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with the situation in this country, but let's put it this way: this country is heavily relying on coal and would like to depend a bit much more on solar, on renewables in general. The World Bank has decided to be extremely, I would say, proactive at funding storage in the country. By extremely proactive, I'm saying the World Bank is essentially wanting to make some kind of set some kind of an example with South Africa in terms of how storage can be deployed at the level of a whole nation. And the way so essentially what the World Bank has suggested is to deploy 1.44 gigawatt hours of storage, the bulk of which supposedly being to be deployed between now and early next year. So really something very, very short, and the rest of that later next year. And the reason, the way they arrived at this 1.44 gigawatt hour of energy storage was simply to say, look, initially they were supposed to obtained funding from the Green Fund to deploy 100 megawatts CSP farm, which was, given the and as you know, CSP is consists both of power generation through solar and some kind of energy storage, and actually thermal energy storage. And so the way they counted was said, look, the average load factor for a CSP in South Africa is 60%, and it's which makes that 100 megawatt asset supposedly is going to be producing on average 1.44 gigawatt hour per day. So you know what, since CSP is both solar and storage, and since CSP is too expensive, we're just going to get rid of the solar part and only focus on the storage part. And so that's how they said, okay, well, you know what, let's deploy 1.44 gigawatt hour of storage in chunks, in blocks of a few dozen megawatts. So the idea is to deploy 60 to 80 projects all across the country, each with 4-hour duration. And so far, as we understand, where it's kind of unclear if this plan is fully financed. The last discussion we had with Development Finance Institution is that the financing is still not fully completed. Some other reports are a bit conflicted on that, but all we know is that there's something that the World Bank is super heavily involved in, and which may have a very short-time impact on suppliers of energy storage, but actually not so much on IPPs, because the way the World Bank, fortunately or unfortunately, decided to fund this was through a subsidy to Eskom, which is a national utility. So first thing for South Africa, you know what? Here's 2 minutes on the country and one slide, but for a market which could be as big as probably, pretty much $1 billion. So you want to watch out for this. And if you have connections there, it's probably time that you got involved. You may have noticed that my accent is French. That's because I'm French, and I didn't put France on that thing just because I am French, but there's something going on here, which in this country, which I think is France is usually poorly understood by foreign investors in terms of electricity, because it's actually wrongly perceived as a territory where EDF sets the rules. They do set a lot of rules, but not the rules of the market I'm going to be discussing now, which is the market of frequency regulation, which in Europe is called FCR, for Frequency Containment Reserve. I apologize for the acronym on that slide. Simply put, this market has been slowly opening up in France over the past couple of years. It's remaining on this graph. It moved from something which was essentially not a market before 2016 to a fully open market, which is a common auction with France in the neighboring countries. So 6 countries are sharing the same market. But the good thing with France is it has more favorable rules than the neighboring countries, such that even though you're participating in the same market as countries nearby, you just have you need less capex to effectively participate. So it's a market to be very specifically considered. Frequency regulation in France is a market which is about 500 to 550 megawatts. There's today barely just a few, I reminded in the previous graph, but there's just a few megawatts of assets. So it's clear that a lot of megawatts are going to be deployed in the country in the coming month. So anyone who's interested in this part of Europe should definitely get involved. All the more so regarding France, there are secondary revenue lines that can be obtained. And I mentioned here just a few, which is the capacity market, which pays up to 12.6 thousand euros per megawatt per year for essentially doing nothing. I remind you that the capacity mechanism just means that you must have your asset connected and doing something on the grid. So essentially this payment is just free money. And by the way, there's a discussion, but there will be a 7-year auction, which will be open very soon for capacity market. So that's also something you bankers, when you want to finance your project, will be very excited about. There's other things in France. There has been over the past almost 10 years now a small but somehow steady opportunity for renewable plus storage and standalone storage in the French islands, which is also something to be considered if you are looking at doing some investment in France. And we believe that over the course of the year, there should be over 200 megawatt that will be deployed over the year for a total market to be deployed between mainland and the overseas territory, which is in excess of 0.5 gigawatt, as you can see on this graph. Now we can focus also on South Korea, which has been a super exciting market for renewable plus storage since last year, and probably for a bit more this year. Reason for that is simply put that the way PV plus, let's say the way, for two reasons. The first reason is this country is heavily pushing for renewables. They have a target of, I believe, 20%, yeah, I think it's 20% renewable penetration by 2030, and we reminded here of their target for the coming years, and they're a bit late on they started a bit later in terms of renewables, so they have a lot to catch up on. And one of the ways they decided to push it, remember that South Korea is actually an island. It's an electrical island of 90 gigawatts. They don't really exchange electricity with their neighbors, to be very specific. And so one of the ways they decided to push solar is through renewable plus storage, and the way they pay it is the way they pay PV plus storage is by adding the system marginal price to a renewable energy certificate revenue. So there's two terms to the payment, SMP plus REC, as you can see on the bottom graph. But the whole point is that if your renewable is linked to storage, there's a multiplication factor on this graph, as you can see here. Therefore, it has been super lucrative to deploy PV renewable plus storage in the country. That multiplication factor is coming down and should extinguish, as far as we know, in 2020. It may or may not restart after this. It's unclear, but between now in 2020, we expect hundreds of megawatts to have been deployed in this country, mostly for commercial and industrial energy users. That's regarding South Korea. If I jump with absolutely no geographic logic, but again, we're trying to make as much as a catalog of opportunities as we can in just a few minutes. If I look at the US, clearly the US has been, there's always, the way we see it, the US is a land of opportunity for energy storage. We are, as a consultancy, as a technical consultant, we have been involved in tenders and proposals across the nation. But if I just take a step back and I look at the states, the investments that the states are making, to us, there's three states that stand out. There's California, Massachusetts, and New York, in terms of the state investments. And of course, a lot of you may have been aware that there's also a very interesting federal investment tax credit, which is in place, which essentially allows to drastically reduce your capex through an income tax credit in case you're coupling PV and storage. As a matter of fact, if I delve in a little bit on New York and on Massachusetts, I'm just reminding you guys here, and you can get the slides afterwards, so no need to make screenshots in a rush. What I'm reminding here of are I would say the public funding available in the states of New York that amount to a lot of money. And by the way, the logic for that is that the state of New York is looking to deploy 1.5 gigawatt of energy storage assets by 2025, and they're putting their means to this. Kind of a similar story in Massachusetts, where, by the way, among all of the funding programs that have been announced, there was an announcement of a project just about 2 days ago by NEC Energy Solutions, NEC ES, as part of the program there called the Advanced Commonwealth Energy Storage Program. So those programs are real and are effectively funding projects that we see as being commissioned all across the state. So once again, in the US, beyond the opportunities a lot of you may be seeing in terms of PPAs, there's at least 3 states where we see, I would say, a commitment to deploy more storage and public money in front of that. So that was, to me, the 4 key countries where storage is happening in 2019 and is likely to keep happening in the coming months. There's a few other places there's some other places for which we would like to keep our eye open. The first one is Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has made a very ambitious, what they call integrated resource plan, which is a sophisticated way to discuss, which means their energy roadmap to be simpler. And according to that integrated resource plan, the island for the state of, let's say, neither country nor state, Puerto Rico would like to have a 900 megawatts of storage to be already operational by 2022. So it makes constitute a super large opportunity. The question is if and how they're going to effectively attain this. That's a bit the question mark there. There has been, I would say, some regulatory evolutions that are very interesting for us in the context of microgrids and facilitating investments. However, it remains a bit of a difficult place to do business. So we'll see exactly how much of that gets effectively accomplished. So despite that, Puerto Rico, as far as we're concerned, is clearly a region to be extremely careful about in terms of energy storage. And last thing, just to finish up on those smaller opportunities, we are also keeping a very, I would say, interested eyes at what's happening in the Middle East. So actually for us, there's really 4 countries to be looked at this year next. We put Israel just before, just a little bit before. It's a slightly smaller market, but as we understand, there's a lot of regulations being discussed right now to facilitate PV plus storage, and we are really happy to see that. Lebanon and Jordan, so have been, especially Jordan has been an interesting market. In the context of some tenders that have been announced. We're not really sure exactly what's going to happen specifically this year. That's what I put it in orange. And same for Lebanon. Lebanon just published its energy storage roadmap for 2030. By the way, there was an excellent ATA webinar on this just a few days ago. So you definitely are all tuned on the right channel for this. And there has been some tenders in the past also for PV plus storage. So we do see that Lebanon is both a country that needs storage and that will be, that is committing to this. Well, the logic there is not very complicated. I mean, Israel, just like Korea, is kind of an electrical island. It's a 17 gigawatt electrical island. So they have no choice but to rely on storage. And as far as Lebanon and Jordan, those countries used to be counting a lot on Syria for grid stability. And well, you know what, Syria does not provide any form of stability, let alone grid stability. So in that context, it's kind of logical that Lebanon and Jordan are kind of on the forefront of looking for storage there. Saudi Arabia there's been a lot of talks and not a lot of action, but we understand that there should be some tenders coming up by the end of 2020. So it's really not really for this year, but we always want to keep an eye for what's happening there. We don't really see a lot of opportunities actually, unfortunately, in the UAE. Again, this country doesn't seem to be really committed or interested in energy storage. Voilà, that was, I guess, my very short and very fast. I apologize for my my speaking pace, but I'm sure I'll check the questions now, and I'm sure some of you have understood some of the things I've said. If not, if I wasn't clear, ask questions now. By the way, everything that you have seen here is addressed in more detail in the beautiful report that we happen to be selling in at the address there. But in any case, I do suggest that you send us some questions should you want to discuss any of those topics further. Belen, I spoke for almost 2/3 of the time. There you go.
Yeah, but you did a good job. You went through them, you know, systematically. Well done. Can you take that off so we can see you better? And yes, by all means,
yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, go into the website, check out the reports. You know, they have their own data. They look into it. You know, they know their stuff. So if you're looking into the battery markets, you need to have the very best intelligence. So get in touch with these guys. Right. One of the questions, the first question is about Latin American countries yet. I know we had a webinar about Mexico particularly, but maybe you can give us a little bit of the down low onto what's going on with Latin America and what are the opportunities there.
You said in Latin America, right? Okay.
Yes, sir. It says Latin America. What are the opportunities?
Oh, yeah, because I don't see the questions. Yeah, but whatever. I will figure this out. So Latin America clearly, so depends where you see. If you see Caribbean as Latin America, I just mentioned Puerto Rico. We do see a lot of opportunities. We actually recently opened an office in Miami specifically to take over opportunities in LATAM. So to us, the key geographies in LATAM are the following. Yes, Mexico is clearly an emerging part of the country of the region. following the discussion that the regulator is currently conducting on creating specific ancillary services rules for the country. That's one. Number two, there is an existing market in Chile which we believe is quite interesting. There's actually probably a business case that actually works from on a lot of cases in Chile. We also see this topic clearly emerging in the context of new regulatory change pretty much now, between now and July, really, in Colombia. So I would say if I was going to rank, take the top 3 countries for us, are probably those 3, and with a special mention to what's it called, Brazil, which has been issuing its own tenders for storage, which we are of course quite interested in.
Excellent, thank you very much. What about the Indian market? This is one that is hot and people are talking about.
Yes, actually, I don't know much about the Indian market. Oops, caught me. Yeah, there's 2 markets where we have bit difficulties following, to be quite frank, is the Chinese and the Indian market. And that person can ask me a question, can ask me the question directly or send me an email or whatever, and I'll put him in touch with there's a consultant there that knows his left from his right in India, and he will probably help. He will be helpful to navigate there. We've found difficulties to do that.
If I'm not wrong, I think I actually know the person who asked this question. Shirish, hi. You heard the man.
Send me an email, I'll connect you.
It's a very complicated market as well. There is a lot of things happening, state level, federal level anyway, but definitely it's a market that is opening up, and a lot of opportunities remain because there's so many grid issues, right? And there is so much PV going on the grid. They're very cheap prices, so it's only likely to continue, right? George here asks, what type of storage technology has been used, or rather, what are you seeing in terms of batteries when you're talking about forecasts?
I just found the questions, by the way. I see that. Okay, so the storage technologies, you have to click on chat. I knew that. The okay. So I'm not looking at pump hydro. I'm looking at the rest. And if I exclude pump hydro, pretty much between 98 and 100% of what has been sold this year has been lithium ion. Does that answer the question?
CSP though. Right?
So yeah, because I'm talking about yeah, right. So I'm talking about storage where there's electricity coming in. So as far as, to me, CSP, what comes in is heat. So in a way, it's heat storage in order to generate electricity. So I tend to see CSP, the thermal storage, which is part of the CSP, the way I see it, but it's maybe a professional bias, is more part of the generation, as opposed to electricity storage, which is actually both part of the consumption, but it takes electricity in, and of the generation.
Understood. Okay. Rodrigo asks, what do you think about Mexican market? Yeah, we had a webinar about Mexico.
Rodrigo, no, it's not that we had a webinar, it's that I had to speak Spanish for 10 minutes, which was extremely painful to everybody listening. So Rodrigo should find a recording of that webinar.
Use a recording, definitely. So, but I mean, give us the, quick for people who may not understand.
The flavor is, so the webinar, Rodrigo, the webinar we did, Rodrigo, we did it with Tim Effio from Fluence. So Tim was adamant at describing behind the meter behind the meter solutions for commercial industrial customers. He explained the business case, and I talked a bit more about front of the meter. And as I mentioned, front of the meter, as of today, it kind of doesn't really work yet. You can't really make it merchant, although the trend is that the regulator is opening up and changing the regulations as we speak. It's writing those regulations to allow energy storage to effectively be selling services to the grid. So when that happens, which will be soon, what I just said about front of the meter will be completely untrue anymore. So it's definitely a market in which to step foot now to get ready for when the regulations open up.
Okay, I'm just going to keep firing because we have 5 minutes. What are, in your opinion, the more promising energy storage technologies other than batteries? Okay, so other than batteries, okay, so if you exclude the batteries, well, all right, so so I'm going to assume that
Yeah. Yeah. So if the need is to store really energy, to have 1, 2, 3, 4 hours of energy, okay. So the ones I've seen, which could make sense in some configurations, are actually mini pump hydro. There's at least one company that I know that works on below 1 megawatt pump hydros that can be a closed loop and very easily deployed pretty much anywhere in the world, really. Since it's closed loop, you just need of course a few high difference between the two basins, and actually to over 4 hours, when you couple that with PV, you can have peaking prices that can be competitive with some of the diesel gensets. So that's what I've seen. That's more on the energy side without batteries. And so if you really have, of course, need for very long duration, then the way to go that is emerging and more discussed is hydrogen. Although to be quite frank, to be in the money, you need to be in a very, very specific case still. So I tend to, well, we can have another discussion on this. And as far as power storage to deliver power real fast, of course there's flywheels, but they tend to be expensive. So yeah, whatever. So let's stick to mini pump hydro. That was a good answer. I like it.
All right. You've given us also like a stream of thought there to follow up.
Yeah.
So, all right, price. What is the current price per kilowatt hour with the storage for 100?
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, that's a difficult. Okay, so that's a difficult question because the price, Santiago Uribe, I don't know you, but I know you're a tough one, because usually, well, I'm gonna not answer your question. I'm gonna answer just next to the question. Below 1 megawatt hour, so sorry, above 1 megawatt hour, for batteries that are in the 5 or 10 megawatt hour range or above, but typically, like a good rule of thumb is per megawatt hour, you have to pay $250,000. But remember, you also have to pay per megawatt, which includes, in the way I represented, the balance of plant and the installation, EPC, etc., which is usually typically $250,000 per megawatt. Now, below 1 megawatt of storage, the unit prices jack up. They go up because there's less competition, the systems are smaller, so it's a bit difficult to answer your question in a per kilowatt hour basis for systems that are below 1 megawatt. So what I did is I answered above 1 megawatt.
Okay, so I ask you, look, there is 4 questions open now. Which one would you like to answer since you only have a minute?
Okay. It is good, but which business model for storage? Well, Lema has not finished. No, are you ready to benefit because specific? Okay, the last one is easy. So I think they're all interested. They're all great questions. Too bad when you have 1 minute. So last one is easy. Usually to Laima, the question is, in your opinion, which business models for storage are ready to benefit, to be to be positive, besides the ones that are mandated by regulations? So here's the rule of thumb. Behind the meter users buy energy, they pay their energy. There's always, in every electricity bill that I know of, there's a component per kilowatt hour and per kilowatt. When the component per kilowatt is high, it usually means that storage can play a role. Why? Because if you have a high component per kilowatt, and if you are the kind of user that's flat almost all the time, except at some point you have a peak, well, that's you need with a storage that you don't use too much and which then doesn't really degrade. You can very easily go from one tier of tariff to the lower one, and so those countries where this happens is a lot across the U.S. It's in Ontario, Canada. It's in Great Britain, for example. And those places have very high per kilowatt component in their CNI utility tariff. So that's a good rule of thumb.
All right, I think that's it. This is all we have time for, but thank you very much,
Too bad.
Michael. You've been great. This is what you do great. You know, you just like dishing the answers. I love it.
Really? Okay.
Yes, you guys.
Anything to make you happy.
Yeah, excellent. Guys, well, thank you very much to Michael for sharing his knowledge. You have his email address, so if you have any further questions, there is definitely a lot of know-how in Clean Horizon in terms of batteries. So I suggest you all to get in touch. That's it. Thank you very much for coming and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye, guys.